On September 3rd, 2017, a man-made earthquake, 6.3 on the Richter scale, is felt on the Korean peninsula. The North Korean leadership boasts a successful test of a hydrogen bomb.
평양 최고 용사 김정은이 계시면 우리는 반드시 이긴다는 것을 다시금 뼈에 되었습니다.
우리 핵 과학자 기술자들에게 뜨거운 축하를 보내요.
The underground explosion strikes fear and anger throughout the international community.
The Security Council must act to stop North Korea.
We have kicked the can down the road long enough. There is no more road left.
I think they've come to the conclusion that they have a much greater chance of survival by being a threatening power than being a cooperative one.
North Korea is the most secretive and isolated nation in the world, and its actions have been vexing America for 70 years. In 2006, I went undercover there and found a world of absolute conformity. Government minders.
Tomorrow, we are going out of our country.
And unimaginable horrors that people risk their lives to escape. I'd never felt as isolated as I did as soon as I touched down in North Korea. Then, 3 years later, it got personal when my sister Laura was abducted and imprisoned there while on assignment for Current TV.
The soldier raised the butt of his rifle and brought it down on my head, and I just blacked out. The next thing I know, I'm in North Korea.
In the light of a new leader and increased global concern, I look back on my trip in 2006 and my sister's capture. Inside North Korea, then and now. When I went into North Korea in 2006, the dear leader Kim Jong-il ruled with absolute power. He died on December 17th, 2011. In the capital, Pyongyang, the funeral procession lasted for hours. The dear leader's disciples' grief will last much longer. His youngest son, Kim Jong-un, has become the third Kim to rule this dynastic communist nation. He is called the Supreme Leader. To the watching world, not yet 30-year-old Kim Jong-un was an unknown and is today still enigmatic and unpredictable.
When Kim Jong-un took power, he systematically went out and wiped out his opposition with a brutality that we had not really seen from his father or his grandfather, and was smart enough to quickly change his appearance, his haircut, whatever, to remind everybody of his grandfather, the country's founder, Kim Il-sung. He may have been young, he may have been callow, he may have been mistrusted. He came out on top.
It is estimated Kim Jong-un has assassinated 140 senior leaders, including an uncle and likely his half-brother. His regime has tested over 80 rockets, successfully launching ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that threaten its enemies. In 2016, American college student Otto Warmbier, touring North Korea, was arrested and sentenced to 15 years hard labor.
I beg for forgiveness.
He was freed after 17 months, but not before mysteriously falling into a coma. He died shortly after his release. President Obama told then-President-elect Trump that North Korea would be his most urgent international challenge.
Every time there is a new American administration, it seems like the North Koreans try to test the new administration. The difference this time is Kim Jong-un seems to be a lot more unpredictable than his father, and the United States president is sort of an untested entity and is probably the most unpredictable president who's ever sat in that seat as well.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
What does Kim Jong-un want? What are his motives? Across the three Kim dictators, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un, there's been one common theme, which has been that their development of missiles and nuclear weapons and their effort to combine the two is the ultimate survival strategy. That their number one concern is survival. People treat you differently as a nuclear power.
The two successful ICBM launches in July 2017 showed that Kim Jong-un has missiles that appear capable of reaching the continental United States. It puts the US and North Korea on a collision course not seen since the Korean War, and proves that its nuclear program is further along than previously thought. The nation even issues commemorative stamps celebrating the events. North Korea has one of the largest militaries in the world. Parades like this boast awesome power to its people and an ominous message to its enemies. And the North Korean people believe they are still at war with America, though fighting ended in 1953. But the roots of North Korea's antagonism toward foreign powers goes back over a century. In 1910, Korea was colonized by Japan. The brutal occupation ended more than 1,000 years of Korea's reign as a sovereign nation and was a major source of shame. Japan lost Korea in World War II, and the country was split between the American-backed South and the Soviet-backed Communist North, led by a young rebel named Kim Il-sung. In 1950, Kim Il-sung invaded the South to unify the country, and the US opposed communist expansion at all costs. As many as 4 million people died in the Korean War, which included some of the most brutal warfare the world has known. In a 4-month period alone, the US dropped nearly 1 million gallons of napalm. Most major cities in North Korea were at least half obliterated, including Pyongyang. In 1953, after 3 years of fighting, Korea remained divided in almost exactly the same place as it had been before the war began, the 38th parallel. There never was a peace treaty, rather a perpetual state of ceasefire. The joint security area on the border is the one place where North Korean forces stand toe-to-toe with the rest of the world. On one side of this concrete marker is North Korea. On the other, the joint American-South Korean forces. Every flinch is monitored. Neither side wants to blink, and nobody has for over 60 years.
You can see on the North Korean side how they're set up. They have 2 soldiers watching each other, so neither of them defect. And then they have their leader to the north, making sure that no one else from the north will come down and defect.
With everyone watching, no one can cross here. And defecting anywhere else along the DMZ is nearly impossible. The DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone, is a 2.5-mile wide buffer along the border of North and South Korea. With more than 1 million landmines, high-voltage electric fences, and nearly 2 million soldiers, crossing over is almost certain suicide. South Korea's capital, Seoul, is less than 40 miles away from the border. But what makes this place so dangerous is the uncertainty of what lies north of the divide. North Korea, officially the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is regarded as an intelligence black hole.
I think you could certainly make a strong argument that North Korea has been the biggest intelligence failure for the United States since Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. The American intelligence agencies don't take much heat for this because everyone understands that North Korea is a very hard target.
But we know some basic facts. North Korea is roughly the size of Mississippi. It has 25 million people, a showcase capital, Pyongyang, but vast poverty most everywhere else. All three Kims were and are absolute dictators, and worshipped in a personality cult perhaps more extreme than any other in history.
Not only do you have a population that has largely bought into the myth that this family is keeping them safe against the Americans who would overrun their territory, but that the myth all comes out of the founding myth of Kim Il-sung, and that everybody else's authority comes from the fact that they descend from him.
I'd never experienced a kind of roboticism like I experienced in North Korea. And it was really difficult to tell whether people really felt as passionately about their dear leader or they felt compelled to act like they did. Everyone is trained from birth to love the leaders, and virtually no outside sources of information are allowed. Newspapers and television are controlled by the state. Many here don't even know a man has walked on the moon. While the elites at the very top of North Korean society may have access to the global internet, for millions of ordinary North Koreans, there's no way to connect to the outside world. And those elites with cell phones can only speak within its borders. It is this isolation from the rest of the world that earns North Korea the moniker, the Hermit Kingdom. I had always been so curious about North Korea because it's just been this enigma in the world, the country about which the least is known. And so when my renowned cataract surgeon friend, Dr. Sandik Ruet, invited me to follow along with him and his medical team, I jumped at the opportunity to go. The caveat, though, was that I couldn't say that I was a journalist. I had to go under the auspices of being part of his medical team. Thousands of people in North Korea go blind due to a lack of even the most basic medical facilities.
The annual number of surgeries performed is just very little. And the blindness magnitude is one of the highest in the world.
Dr. Sandik Ruet planned to travel from Nepal to North Korea to do more than 1,000 surgeries in less than 10 days. His mission was purely humanitarian. Our entire crew posed as members of Dr. Ruet's medical team. We were going to document his work and show the world what life was like inside North Korea.
But I can send it back.
Sure, you won't need to.
This meeting in a Kathmandu hotel room was the last time our team could converse in private.
So there will be a North Korean man traveling with us the entire time from here to Pyongyang.
From here to Pyongyang and back to Kathmandu.
North Korean minders met us in Nepal and monitored every step until the trip was over. Dr. Ruet knew our South African cameraman, Brian, and I would be watched very carefully.
Do you think that Brian and I will be followed?
I'm sure.
And he was concerned that the cameras would attract too much attention as we entered the country.
We can put the camera down there.
And wanted to pack them more carefully, buried beneath the medical equipment.
Okay, and pack it with linens.
A North Korean official checks our luggage where our cameras are hidden.
And everything is okay. We release the luggage.
2 North Korean minders are already keeping an eye on things.
all of us will be watched very carefully.
Yeah.
I think you shut your camera down now.
In retrospect, I think I was a little naive. I was surprised that no one Googled who I was because I was working for National Geographic at the time. But I thought that if it was ever discovered that I was a journalist, I would just be expelled from the country. So while I had my concerns, I wasn't that scared. But maybe I should have been. After hours in the air, we stole these shots as we approached North Korea. Normally, Americans were not welcome there, and I was told I would be the only one in the entire country. On the ground, we got our first glimpses of Pyongyang and shot undercover footage. No easy task with minders in the car. We passed 12-lane highways with hardly any cars and saw images of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il everywhere. Pyongyang was and still is a city of the relatively privileged. The government rewards strong supporters by letting them live there. And unless you're a high-ranking official, you need a permit to travel anywhere in the country. So from the moment we landed in Pyongyang, I could tell that I was in a place unlike any place I'd ever been before. All of our technological devices were removed from our possession. We had to check them into the airport, and we were assigned 8 government minders, and they followed us everywhere. They even stayed in the guest houses where we were housed. And at a certain point, I realized that I was in Kim Jong-il's North Korea. When we reached the hospital, hundreds of blind people had already gathered for surgery. This hospital was probably as fancy as it got in North Korea. Most of the cutting-edge equipment had been donated by other countries, but few doctors knew how to use it.
It is from America, Iris.
The government let Dr. Ruet and his team come because it was a way for Kim Jong-il to get services to his people. Our team had to bring most of our equipment and supplies with us. And because blackouts were common, even here in the capital, we brought our own generator for power. I hoped we could see what life was really like here, but the government controlled our every move. And the rare times that it had granted foreigners access, they'd only been shown idealized versions of the country, like in this Dutch documentary called A Day in the Life. In this scene, a mother sings nursery rhymes as she walks her child to school.
아니, 승냥이 미국 놈 무릎 꿇고 살려달라.
The film shows only the cheerful facade, because here, image matters. Back at the hospital, Dr. Ruet continued his mission. In the developed world, cataracts rarely get so bad, especially in young people, that they result in blindness. But here, because of poor care and likely poor nutrition, the incidence is as much as 10 times higher than in the West and afflicts young and old alike. But in North Korea, cataracts are only a small part of the humanitarian nightmare. German physician and human rights activist Norbert Fullerton worked for over a year in North Korea. He shot pictures of the horrible medical conditions: bloody old operating tables, beer bottles for IVs, no antibiotics or anesthesia.
Of course, the North Korean government will tell you everything is free in North Korea. It's not true, because it's not available. There is no medicine, there is no running water, there is even no soap in the hospital.
But it was the lack of food and its effect on children that made the most lasting impression.
When I was a medical doctor in North Korea, I saw a lot of starving children. I saw children dying under my hands when I was too late, when there was no more need for any emergency duty, because the child was dying when I came into the room. So I felt so helpless.
In the mid-1990s, natural disasters and government mismanagement created a famine that killed up to 3 million people.
about 10% of North Korea's population. Taking place in the heart of prosperous East Asia, it was one of the worst famines of the century. Surveys done in the early 2000s showed that nearly 40% of North Korean children were chronically malnourished. The average 7-year-old boy in North Korea was nearly 8 inches shorter and 22 pounds lighter than his brother in South Korea.
But I'd say the damage to his bones is permanent.
They were called the stunted generation.
It's a tragic situation, and it's extraordinary because same race, same people, same basic diet, and that's all malnutrition.
Over time, the Kims isolated the country from much of the world, even cutting off foreign aid and communications with the neighbors to the south for long periods of time.
So the way we were able to convince our North Korean minders that we needed to have our cameras with us at all times is that I said I was a medical student and we had to document everything that was happening. I thought that I would get a very skewed perspective of what life in North Korea would be like. I thought I would be resigned just to surgical facilities. But I decided after a few days to ask our minders if we could visit the home of a typical North Korean family. And to my complete shock, they agreed to take me to visit a family.
Our minders led us to the home of a blind patient. The blind woman lived in a 6th-floor apartment in the heart of Pyongyang. Since I was told I was the only American in the country, I felt lucky, but a bit surprised that the minders were willing to take me here.
What a beautiful home.
There were 6 government officials watching our every move, but it was still a rare chance to see inside a real North Korean home. Like others in Pyongyang, this was a privileged family. The woman lived there with 4 of her family members, including her 2 granddaughters. The first thing I noticed was that there weren't any family pictures, just image after image of Kim Jong-il and his father.
Of all their pictures, which is your favorite picture?
장관님 영상을 다 우린 좋아합니다. Every portrait of the
Of course, every picture.
Very good.
Absolutely.
We were warned to photograph the dear leader carefully.
But this is no problem.
So from here up, what happens if it's only half? What happens? Why not? No.
We weren't supposed to ask why. We were supposed to sit down and be entertained by the granddaughter. We wanted to talk to people, but under the watchful eye of the minders, this was what we got.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, 감사합니다. 감사합니다.
Finally, we sat down with the family and asked a few questions.
How difficult is life for your mother without sight?
The son-in-law answered without missing a beat.
눈에 안 보여서 제일 안타까운 게 위대한 실용력 경영장은 자이런 영상을 뵙지 못하는 게 제일 안타까워.
Why do you want to see the supreme leader so much, so bad?
이 세상에 났다가 우리 수령님 덕에 우리 자식들 팔남매가 이렇게 행복하게 사는 걸 우리 수령님을 쳐다보고 인사하고 싶어도 수령님이 영상이 우리 빛이라도 보였으면 하는 소원이 됐습니다.
She was obviously moved, but what surprised me was so was everyone else.
This party official is crying.
Even this government minder.
어머니 말씀 들어서 눈물이 나는데 나라도 그 장군님 안 계신다면 우리는 다 죽은 목숨을 하는 거예요. 나도 어렸을 때 아버지 잃고 정말 장군님 품속에서 학원을 거쳐서 오늘처럼 이렇게 도의민의 대사 지도를 이루라는데.
I just wonder, can the great leader do anything wrong?
What?
Can the great leader do anything wrong? Is there anything wrong, or he's always what he says is magical?
I couldn't understand what you're
Okay.
saying.
I truly believe that Arminder did not understand my question because I think he may have perceived me to be questioning the authority of the dear leader, and that was something just incomprehensible. And so he didn't even understand how to translate such a question.
North Korea is a very small country. How does the great leader defend it against big powers like America?
우리나라는 비록 작아도 이 조선에는 세상에서 가장 이 위대한 분을 모시고 있고 이 미국 놈들이 가지고 있는 이 원자탄보다도 더 이력한 일신단결의 무기가 있기 때문에 미국 놈들이 감히 어쩌지 못하고 조선 앞에 쫄쫄 이고 있습니다. 그것은 다 김종일 장관님을 우리 수령으로 모시고 있는 그런 덕분입니다.
As the conversation wound down, I wondered, where did North Korea's willingness to face down the entire world come from?
더 이력한 무기를 가지고 있기 때문에 그따위 핵무기 같은 건 하나도 무섭지 않습니다.
How did this powerful mindset take hold? North Korea's defiant stance toward the rest of the world stems from a philosophy created by Kim Il-sung called Juche.
The Juche philosophy basically means up yours to the outside world. We can make everything ourselves, we don't need you. And from an outsider's perspective, it's a peculiar thing. I mean, why make such a big deal out of being independent? Your people are starving, you've got no economy, you've got no trade. But in the Korean context, it has a profound resonance because Korean history is one of invasion and all sorts of abuse from major powers. So the North Koreans turned this history around and said, we're not going to take it anymore. And for Koreans, there is a very profound thrill that someone would have the guts to stand up and be like that.
Juche ideology is still used to run North Korea with an iron fist, and for each Kim leader to wield absolute power. It also supported the godlike status of Kim Il-sung during a 50-year reign.
수령님을 존중이 않지 않은 연구자가 서서히 어머니 수령.
When Kim Il-sung died in 1994, he left behind a traumatized nation.
영결의 시각이 다가왔단 말이니까.
His son, Kim Jong-il, took power in the world's first communist dynastic handover. Following in his father's footsteps, Kim Jong-il ruled by fear. And now his son, Kim Jong-un, continues to use the Juche ideology of self-reliance to unify the nation and crush all dissent. On our final evening in North Korea, Dr. Ruet worked late into the night to reach his goal of operating on 1,000 patients. He believes in humanitarian engagement with all the countries of the world, whatever their politics.
The North Korean people have two eyes like you and me. They have a mouth and they have teeth, you know. And it's for the world in general to understand that in North Korea we have a lot of people who need our love.
At the hospital, the cataract patients were waiting for Dr. Ruet to remove their bandages. But they still didn't know if they would be able to see.
It was so fascinating to be in this room. It was almost like a theater. And as they were removing the bandages from the patients, one would think that they would be so expressive of gratitude to the surgical team that restored their vision. But what I saw was something entirely different.
We did a little more than 1,000 surgeries, and all with very good results, no infections. On that aspect, I feel okay.
The minder gave us one last warning to shoot only the full image of the dear leader. The moment of truth came first for a 23-year-old woman. She came with her father and had been completely blind for years.
Ask her to open her eyes.
자, 눈 들어요.
Yeah?
눈 들어요. 뭐예요?
Can she touch my nose?
코다치가 네 손으로.
Where's your? Ask her where is her father.
아버지 어디 있나 여기?
여기 있습니다.
야, 내 보이느냐?
네, 잘 보입니다.
네. 위대한 장군님의 덕분이구나. 우리 장군님께 근서를 드려한다. 우리 장군님 정말 고맙습니다.
이 자리에서 아버지 장군님께 감사 인사를 드리고 싶습니다.
위대한 연구자 김정일 원수님 정말 고맙습니다. 위대한 연구자 김정일 원수님 안돼.
Then we spotted the grandmother we had visited at home. She had been waiting for years to see the dear leader. And she was not disappointed.
정말 고맙습니다. 정말 고맙습니다.
부디 건강하십시오. 이렇게 늙은 우리 어린이 아픔에 안아주시니 얼마나 고맙습니까?
It was so surreal. And I couldn't tell if they truly believed it or they felt like they had to do it. Because if they didn't do it, they might pay the consequences.
일제 원수들을 이 땅에서 완전히 소멸할 때까지 선에서 총을 철저히 들어주고 일제 침략자들을 철저히 소멸할 것입니다.
After I left North Korea, I certainly breathed a huge sigh of relief, and I never thought that I would have any dealings with that country again.
Then our family went into crisis when my sister Laura was abducted and imprisoned there.
In March of 2009, I was working on a documentary about North Korean defectors, people who are fleeing the very desperate conditions in North Korea. And during that time, we were filming along the Tumen River. This is the river that separates China and North Korea. And it was frozen at the time. And so we were literally standing on that frozen river when 2 North Korean soldiers spotted us. They chased us into China and then very violently dragged my colleague, Yoona Lee, and me across that river into North Korea. In the middle of the night, while my husband and I were sleeping, my sister's husband called and he said Laura was abducted by North Korean soldiers. And my heart just sank. I was pretty bruised up and bloodied. And I just tried to keep my wits about me, but I was so scared. We were eventually transferred to Pyongyang. Yoona and I were separated for the remainder of our captivity. And that's when the real formal interrogation began. And I was grilled every day for hours on end, day after day. One of the most difficult parts was trying to convince them that I was not a spy. It didn't help that the co-founder and chairman of the company that I worked for at the time, Current TV, was former Vice President Al Gore. So that immediately made them suspicious that I had ties to the government. One day my interrogator came in and he was carrying a file. And it was all about my sister and the project she had worked on. He was very upset, very suspicious, and he immediately accused both Lisa and me of trying to bring down the North Korean government. Yoona and I became the first Americans to be tried in North Korea's highest court. On the day of our sentencing, the judge and his 2 associates left the room to deliberate. They left for 5 minutes and they returned with their judgment. And that was 12 years of hard labor.
Back in 2006, we interviewed a North Korean defector who had spent time in one of the notorious North Korean prisons. And he described it as just an absolutely heinous and insidious place to be. And so the thought of my sister going there was just unimaginable. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. The judge shouted, "No forgiveness, no appeal." And I just clutched on to the podium. I was standing at a podium and I just clutched onto it to keep from falling over. And I told my interrogator, I said, let me talk to my sister. I don't know what it is that you want, but whatever it is, I can try to convey to her what you may want, and maybe she can help out here. The consensus from the State Department, from Vice President Gore, from every official type person that we'd spoken to was keep it quiet. We don't want to antagonize the North Koreans. We don't know what happened, so let's keep this out of the press. And one of the first things I said to my sister was, we've been keeping this quiet. And she said, no, we need to change that. It became very clear to me that the North Korean authorities wanted a visit from former President Bill Clinton, that they wanted him to serve as the envoy. And so in a phone call to my sister, I asked, do you think that President Clinton can come here to rescue us? And she was very quiet. I mean, there was a period of just silence. And I think because she realized that was going to be a very tricky request, especially since Hillary Clinton was the current Secretary of State. After that first phone call, I sort of launched this media campaign of deference to the North Korean government, knowing how sensitive the North Korean government is, knowing as an Asian how important saving face is. I knew that we had to communicate to the North Korean government how sorry my sister was, and we had to beg for mercy and beg them publicly to forgive the mistake, or at least release my sister and her colleague on humanitarian grounds. I was also allowed letters. I devoured each and every word, memorized every letter that I received. I so desperately wanted to reach right through the phone when you called and just pull you back home to me. I can't believe that this is still happening. My sister's letters were really strategic. Lisa always expressed messages of deference and respect to the North Korean authorities, always apologizing, and she knew that I wasn't the only one reading those letters. In fact, sometimes they would arrive with coffee stains on them. After Vice President Gore had gotten President Clinton to agree to go, we had a conference call. It was a secret mission to North Korea. And it all happened very, very quickly. Images of President Clinton landing in North Korea started to emerge on television. And there to greet him was a jubilant-looking Kim Jong-un. It became pretty apparent to me when there was a news report on in the guards room, and I heard the North Korean newscaster, and I heard her say, "Clinton!" in this booming voice, and I looked at the TV and I could see the report about the meeting that had gone on between President Clinton and Kim Jong-il. And Yoona and I were together at that time, and I said, what is she saying, Yoona? And she said that there was a warm meeting
between Kim Jong-il and President Clinton. And I looked at her and I said, you know, we're going home.
After 140 days of fear and uncertainty, Laura Ling and Yuna Lee walked away from North Korea, free women again, looking well and bound for home.
When he met with Kim Jong-il had told Clinton that when Kim Jong-il's father, Kim Il-sung, passed away in 1994, Clinton was the first leader to call Kim Jong-il to offer his condolences, even before Kim's own allies. Kim told Clinton that he always remembered that gesture and had wanted to meet him ever since. And I think that it's so wild to think that that gesture that happened so many years before could have been responsible for our freedom. I think it also shows how there was a mutual civility between the two leaders that allowed diplomacy to really work.
Now, a decade later, Kim Jong-un enjoys the devotion and power his father and grandfather had. He also seems to have a penchant for wanting to be on the world stage.
Kim Jong-un, like his father and his grandfather, has played an extremely weak hand brilliantly. There are people who like to get out there and say, this man's crazy. If so, he is crazy, but a pretty brilliant strategist, a pretty brutal player, and pretty savvy at understanding how small technological edges in nuclear and in cyber enable him to have the power to reach out at the United States and other enemies.
According to North Korea, their country has technically been at war with the United States for decades. And in many respects, I think that they do need to feel that tension between our two countries, because otherwise they would start to question the regime about why there's so much poverty and devastation. By having this enemy to focus on, it gives a pass to their own government for not providing sufficiently for its people.
Certainly the North Koreans want to be treated with respect as a significant power, but they have no illusions that they will get there by integration, economic integration with the West. Do I think that the North Koreans would pick up a nuclear weapon and lob it at the United States? No, because 45 minutes later, that would be the end of the regime. Do I think that they might use the threat that they could hold American cities hostage as a way to get something else that they want? Yeah, I think that's completely within their capability.
According to the Korean Central News Agency, Kim Jong-un says defiantly that North Korea is nearing its goal of military equilibrium with America.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. In 70 years...
As the rhetoric between the U.S. and North Korea escalates, the international community is largely where they've been for decades,
of growing dangers,
initiating harsher sanctions that appear to have no effect on stopping Kim's goal of being a threatening nuclear power.